I'm so glad that you're making people improv because that I think I think taking improv classes was probably one of the biggest benefits I've ever had in my life when it comes to communication, because it does just sort of shock your nervous system to a point where you're just like, I guess I have to go. I don't even know. Like, let's figure it out.
Hmm.
And you're bringing up something that I do in my mock interviews, which is, I say to people at the beginning of the mock interview, pretend I'm not your coach. I am a real interviewer. Because if I don't say that, what they end up doing is start answering a question incorrectly. And then they go, oh, wait, let me try that again. And I'm like, you could never do that in an interview. And what you're doing when you say that is you're robbing yourself of the recovery mechanism of your brain. And I'm always trying to encourage people, rather than trying to avoid mistakes, get a lot better at recovering from mistakes.
Mm.
And the way I see this in my own life is I'm a rambler. I love rambling. I go off topic. I go in all sorts of different directions. And I used to like have that fight, flight, or freeze mechanism, right? And for me, it was like freeze.
Yeah.
I would just like get stuck and like have a frog in my throat, and it would be terrible. And and I just remember like at a certain point, I was like, what other ways can I respond to this emotionally when I start rambling? And I was like, what if I just respond with like overexcitement? What if I'm like, all right, I catch myself rambling. Instead of freezing and getting panicky, I go, I'm sorry. I get really excited about these topics. Let me restate the question and try again. And almost always the interviewer is like, sure, whatever. Like, they don't really care that much. And they're like, actually, I forgot what question I asked, so I'm glad you repeated it, And so I'm always encouraging people to like get better at responding properly when things go wrong, rather than trying to avoid it. Because I think that's the avoidance piece that you called out is such an important thing for people to stop doing. We cannot avoid these uncomfortable situations. We can only embrace them and push through them. What are some of the other types of emotional responses you see in people? There's over apologizing. There's obviously anxiety, but like, do people ever freeze? Do people ever like, I don't know, run away somehow? How would you run away from an interview? I don't even know. But like, what sort of things do you see come up emotionally for folks?
So freezing, I mean, definitely happens for sure. But I think, going to what you were just talking about the recovery of mistakes, I think what often happens is people tend to resort to grading themselves. And so what I mean by that is like, when you're a kid and you're going through middle school and high school, right? You make mistakes on a paper, your teacher writes it up in red ink, and then they give you a grade, and maybe it's not very good. And then your parents yell at you, and it's this very like negative experience all the way through. And so when people are going through these challenges with English and they're going through these exercises, they start to count. They count the number of mistakes they make. And they're like, oh my goodness, I made some mistakes. And so, we talked about freezing and apologizing. There's also just like this deflating, right? You start to just get depressed with yourself because you're like, I've been taking these courses, I've been practicing, and I still make 10 mistakes every time I talk, or I still make 15 mistakes every time I talk. And it's like, they're just resorting to this old way of thinking of the number of mistakes equals your grade. And maybe that was true in high school, but that's not true in real life, at least as far as language learning is concerned. And so what I try to encourage them when they start to grade themselves like this is to stop thinking of the mistakes as this grade, but think of them as a custom study plan. It's a custom study plan. Because, if we think back again to just like a live class, you go to a class, the teacher's prepared some lesson for you, and they go talk about whatever that lesson is. If you're just sitting there listening to it, maybe 50% of it's relevant to you, maybe 20% is relevant to you, maybe 80, but there's a good chance that not everything that teacher's saying that whole time is relevant if they're just talking at you the whole time. Versus when I'm doing a class with a student in my community, as I said, 90% of the time they're talking. I'm not talking. So we're looking at their specific mistakes. And instead of counting them to give a grade, we say, hey, this is an area that's highly relevant to you. We were just talking about your job. This is a mistake you're making when you're talking about your job. So let's fix it. And so when something is relevant and timely, those are the things that your brain is going to remember versus, oh, Kevin gave a class today where he talked for an hour about, the best action verbs to put on your resume. Like maybe that person doesn't care about their resume right now. Maybe they already feel good about action verbs. So that might not be relevant to them. They just wasted an hour versus, hey, let's look at the mistakes. We're not going to count them to give you a grade so you feel depressed, where we're going to use them as a custom, highly relevant, highly targeted study plan for you. Now that gives you a better chance of actually improving and being able to use what you're learning at your job or in your next career search.
That's an incredible approach. I love that. Yeah. And the timeliness of information is so important. I remember I have worked with organizations in the past that it's like the student needs to be doing this thing at this point, at this week, doing this. And it's like, I don't know. I tend to find people get stuck in a certain area and they kind of need to stay in that area as long as as long as they need to in order to get through it. Otherwise, they mentally can't move on to the next thing because they're still sort of stuck in like, how do I network or what am I trying to do with my career? Big questions, right? And so like, but this is where I think motivation and, drive come into play because, look, the job search is a long drawn out process. It can take anywhere from 3 to 6 months to a year, depending on someone's activities and all sorts of different stuff. And again, if you're native to the country, it's already a difficult situation with job boards and interviews and networking and all that stuff, let alone if you, again, have these additional considerations. And so when it comes to motivation and staying driven or like engaged, how do you sort of tackle that motivation piece with the folks that you work with? Are they pretty intrinsically motivated and like driven themselves? Do you have to create systems to help them stay engaged and not burn out? What are some of the things that you typically see?
Yeah, so I mean, I would say in general, if they've come to me looking for help with this particular issue, they're probably going to skew more towards being motivated, right? Because they're actively seeking help. But that doesn't mean that like everybody all the time is just going to be able to persevere and constantly do exercises and show up to classes and stuff if they start to feel like things aren't going the way they want to. And so that's where, I think when it comes to language learning, one of the things that a lot of people want to avoid is feeling like they're alone. Like they don't want to feel like they're alone in this. They don't want to just go buy a video course and watch videos because then again, they're alone. They don't really know if they're improving. They don't really know where the problems are. And so, I call my platform a community for a reason. It's really meant to be something that is highly interactive because I think that that's how you do maintain a lot of this motivation. So not only do you have the teachers, myself and my staff kind of giving these corrections, giving these feedback pieces, whether it's offline or in a class, but you have other students there as well that are actively learning with you, that are in the classes with you, that are encouraging you, that you're having conversations with offline, that can help you feel like, hey, this is a community, this is a group of people, we're all working towards the same goal. I want to be a part of that. And then what also happens is I think success becomes a little contagious. So you see one person and they're like, yeah, I did really well at this today, or I wanted to publish this story to see what you guys think. And then other people want to share too, right? So there are all these little like underlying systems in place to try to encourage you to not only just, use your language despite making mistakes, because I don't want you to grade yourself, but then to use it in a way where you actually are interacting with real human beings and not just some chat room or just like a graded paper you send in and then a week later someone replies to you.